Hi, my name's Martha Reed, and I used to believe that family reunions were harmless, just food, laughter, and stories from people who share your last name. But the truth? Sometimes those gatherings remind you exactly why you left in the first place. Last Sunday, I found myself pulling into my mother's driveway after 7 years of avoiding that house. 7 years. And as I turned off the engine of my old blue pickup, I could already see them on the porch. Rick, my older brother, holding a beer, his wife, Tammy, scrolling on her phone, and Mom, fussing with her pearls like she was hosting a royal banquet instead of a backyard cookout. They didn't wave. They just looked. You know that kind of look? Half polite, half judging. The kind that says, we're being nice because people are watching. A week earlier, Rick had called out of the blue. His tone was light, almost rehearsed. Hey sis, Mom wants everyone at the lake house this weekend. It's been forever. You are coming, right? I hesitated. The last time I went to one of those gatherings, I'd ended up washing dishes alone while everyone else posed for family photos. Still, some tiny, stubborn part of me said yes. Maybe because I missed Dad. He passed 3 years ago and the thought of not showing up felt wrong. Maybe because I wanted to believe things had changed. Or maybe because I wanted to prove that I had. The drive up to the lake was 3 hours through winding hills and soft pine. My truck rattled on every bump, but it was steady, like me. Old, a little worn, but still running. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, crow's feet near my eyes, a few silver threads in my hair. 49 and freer than I'd ever been, yet somehow nervous about walking back into a house that once made me feel 12 years old again. By the time I arrived, the yard looked like a magazine spread. White tents, a rented caterer, and music drifting from hidden speakers. Rick must have gone all out this year. I parked behind a line of shiny SUVs and felt the heat rise to my cheeks. My truck looked like an intruder among them, like it had stumbled into a neighborhood it couldn't afford. Mom spotted me first. Her smile froze halfway. Still driving that thing? She asked, wiping her hands on a napkin. I forced a laugh. It gets me where I need to go. She nodded, clearly unconvinced, then leaned closer. You could have borrowed something nicer from your husband. Appearances matter, dear, I didn't bother correcting her. Ex-husband, technically. But explaining that would open a door she'd never close. Inside, the chatter wrapped around me like static. Cousins I barely recognized bragged about new promotions, home renovations, cruises to Italy. Tammy waved her phone at me, showing pictures of their latest vacation. You should come next time, she said. Oh, but I guess the farm keeps you busy. Her smile was sugar sweet. Her eyes weren't. I nodded. Yeah, animals don't feed themselves. Rick clapped me on the shoulder. You still running that little patch of land? 40 acres isn't little, I said lightly. He chuckled. Right. Hobby farming. Cute. The word cute landed like a mosquito bite. Small, but impossible to ignore. The table conversation turned to investments, retirement plans, the market. Someone asked what I was investing in these days. I said, bees. Silence. Then laughter. Oh, that's adorable, one cousin said. Honey money. I smiled, but inside something shifted. Not anger exactly, just that old ache of being misunderstood, the kind that sits behind your ribs and hums quietly. Later, while everyone moved toward the buffet, Mom cornered me by the window. You know, Martha, she began, lowering her voice as if sharing a kindness, if you'd stayed in Boston after college, you could have built a real career. Not this rural hobby of yours. I looked outside at the lake, sunlight bouncing off the water like coins. Maybe, I said, but I built a life. She didn't respond. She just sighed, the kind of sigh that carries disappointment disguised as love. Dinner stretched long. The more wine flowed, the bolder the jokes became. When someone mentioned taking a family photo, Rick called out, "Let's line up the kids first, then the adults, and then Martha with the farmhands." Laughter again, full and easy. Even Mom chuckled. I set down my fork carefully. No drama, no scene, just quiet. That's something I'd learned over the years. Silence can be its own language. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing air, and walked down toward the lake. The music faded behind me, replaced by the sound of crickets and the faint ripple of water hitting the dock. The sun was low now, bleeding orange into the treetops. I slipped off my shoes and let my toes touch the cool wood. For the first time that day, I breathed. Why had I come? Maybe I was still chasing the version of my family I'd always hoped existed, the one where love didn't need proof and respect didn't depend on money or titles. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Rick. "Don't take the joke so hard, sis. We're just having fun. Fun. Right." I turned the screen off and stared at the horizon. The air smelled of pine and barbecue smoke, memories tangled with regret. I thought about how many times I'd tried to fit in, to explain my choices, to make them proud, and how every time I'd left feeling smaller. But not tonight. Something was different. The gravel behind me crunched softly, tires on the driveway. I glanced over my shoulder and saw headlights gliding through the trees. A dark truck pulled in, newer, smoother, its paint catching the last edge of daylight. And that's when I smiled, because I knew who it was. David. He stepped out, tall, steady, dust on his boots and kindness in his eyes, the man they'd all written off years ago as too quiet, too simple. Except he wasn't simple. He'd built something solid, something that mattered more than appearances. And in that moment, standing there between the fading sun and the people who'd once laughed me out of their stories, I realized this reunion wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally showing up as the woman I'd become. No apologies, no explanations. I turned back toward the porch where the laughter was still rolling, unaware. David caught my eye and gave a small nod, like a promise. And that's where the story really began. David walked toward the porch with that calm confidence I'd always admired. Not loud, not showy, just grounded. He'd been my anchor for years, the kind of man who fixed broken fences before breakfast and remembered the names of our mail carriers. When he reached me, he handed over a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Forgot this in the truck," he said softly. I smiled. Inside were jars of our homemade honey, my side business. He'd insisted we bring some as gifts. We climbed the steps together. The conversation on the porch stumbled to a stop. Rick blinked, surprised. "Well, look who finally made it." David offered his hand first. "Hey, Rick. Good to see you." Rick shook it after a pause. "Yeah, you too, man. Still working construction?" "Some," David said easily. "Mostly consulting now." Semi-retired Tammy tilted her head. "Consulting? That sounds fancy." He just smiled. "Not fancy. Just honest work." Mom stepped forward, her voice a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "David, we weren't sure you'd be joining us." "Martha didn't mention you were coming." "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "It's been too long." Rick snorted lightly. "Guess so. You're braver than me, showing up in that old truck of hers. Didn't think it'd make the hill a few laughs followed. I waited for the old sting, that familiar burn of embarrassment. But it didn't come. Not this time." David just chuckled. "That truck's tougher than it looks." "Same as its driver." His words were simple, but the way he said them, calm, sure, without apology, quieted the porch. Mom forced a smile. "Well, dinner's ready." Everyone inside the dining room gleamed under the chandelier, a little too polished for what was supposed to be a casual reunion. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, and that long oak table that had seen more tension than love. I took a seat near the end, across from my cousin Elaine. She leaned in. "So Martha, still doing that honey thing?" I nodded. "Yeah, actually." We expanded. 3 new hives this spring. She blinked. "Wow, I didn't know there was money in that. There isn't always," I said. "But it's not just about money." She smiled politely, the universal response for something she didn't understand. Rick poured himself another drink. "So what's new on the farm?" Still rescuing stray animals? Just 2 this year, I said. Guess that makes you a hero, he teased. Mom laughed, too loud. Rick, be nice. But she was smiling, not at me, but at him. That same smile she always saved for whoever she was proud of at the moment. Tammy reached for her wine. You know, she said, I read an article about people who leave city life and find themselves in the country. Like those retreat stories. Very trendy right now. I didn't move to find myself, I said, setting down my fork. I moved to live. Rick raised an eyebrow. Pretty deep for someone who spends her days talking to chickens. This time I laughed, not sarcastically, but softly. You'd be surprised how much more sense chickens make than people sometimes. A few chuckles, polite but awkward. The conversation moved on, leaving me with that old, familiar distance, like I was sitting in the same room but still miles away. Halfway through dinner, Mom stood up and tapped her glass. Before dessert, she said, I'd like to make a little toast. To family, to how far we've all come. Glasses clinked, everyone smiled, and then, with that same bright tone, she added, and to my daughter Martha, for finally joining us. We were starting to think she'd gone completely off the grid laughter again. I smiled, but inside I felt the weight of those words, how they sounded more like a jab than a welcome. David's hand brushed mine under the table. Just once, a quiet reassurance. Dessert came. Cherry pie, store-bought but dressed up to look homemade. Mom loved to say she'd finished it herself. As plates were passed around, Tammy whispered something to Elaine, who covered her mouth to hide a giggle. I didn't need to ask what it was about. When Rick stood up to refill his drink, he turned to David. So, consulting, huh? That must be nice. Not exactly blue collar anymore. David smiled. Still blue at heart. But these days, we work with local veterans' housing projects. Keeps us busy, Mom perked up. Veterans housing? He nodded. We finished one just last week. Martha helped with the planning. Every head turned toward me. I wasn't expecting that. Rick chuckled. Oh, come on, what did she do? Paint the porch? David's tone didn't change, but his eyes did. Steady, calm. She designed the garden spaces. You should see them. They're beautiful. The table fell silent. Mom cleared her throat. Well, that's lovely. But I could feel it. That quiet unease that fills a room when people realize they've underestimated someone. After dinner, everyone migrated back outside. The night had settled in, warm and humid, crickets singing from the trees. Rick lit a fire in the pit, trying to reclaim the attention. All right, he said, group photo time. Let's get everyone who's still sober. People laughed and started gathering. When I stepped forward, Elaine called out, Oh no, Martha, we're doing the immediate family first. We'll do the rest later. The rest. Something inside me stilled. I stepped back without a word, hands clasped behind me. David started to move, but I shook my head gently. They lined up by the firelight. Mom in the middle, Rick on one side, Tammy on the other. Perfect symmetry. The camera flashed. Laughter again. Then Rick shouted, Hey, Martha! Come stand behind us with the truck. It'll make a great rustic background. Everyone laughed again. And there it was. The familiar punchline I'd spent half my life avoiding. I looked at the truck, then at them. My mother smiled, as if this were all harmless fun. I walked slowly toward the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots. David called softly. You okay? Yeah, I said. I just missed a spot. He frowned, not understanding. I reached the truck, opened the tailgate, and took out one of the honey jars from earlier. The label caught the firelight. Reed Family Apiary. I set it gently on the porch rail right in front of my brother. Here, I said. A little sweetness for the road. Then I turned back toward the lake, my footsteps steady, my heart oddly calm. Behind me, I heard Rick mutter, She's so dramatic. Mom sighed. It's just a joke. And maybe it was. But the thing about jokes, they stop being funny when you're the only one who never laughs. Down by the dock again, I let the night breeze brush against my face. The reflection of the fire danced on the water like a ghost of warmth that never reached me. I could hear their laughter fading in the distance, thinner now. For the first time, it didn't sting. It just sounded small. And right there, under the moonlight, I realized something I should have known years ago. You can't make people see your worth by standing in rooms that refuse to look your way. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. When I turned around, David was walking toward me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. He just stood beside me in silence, watching the water ripple under the stars. The quiet between us felt like home. We stood by the lake for a long time, David and I. The water shimmered like liquid glass, carrying the echo of laughter from the porch. "Want to leave?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. Not yet. It wasn't pride keeping me there. It was clarity, a strange calm I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes when you stop trying to fix what was never yours to mend. He nodded, understanding without pressing. That's one thing about David. He never fills the silence just to make it comfortable. We sat on the old dock, legs dangling over the edge. Somewhere behind us, I could hear the screen door creak open. Footsteps. My mother's voice, soft but tight. "Martha?" I didn't turn around right away. "Down here, Mom." She made her way toward us, her heels clicking against the boards. When she reached the end of the dock, she sighed, the sound sharp and tired. "You shouldn't run off like that." "Everyone's asking where you went." "Are they?" I asked. She frowned. "Of course they are." You make things awkward when you disappear. People noticed David started to stand, but I caught his wrist. Not yet. I looked up at her. "Mom, when was the last time you noticed me? Not the version you wanted, but me." She blinked, thrown off. "What are you talking about?" "All night you've been talking at me," I said, "about what I should have done, where I should have stayed, what I should have become. But not once did you ask if I'm happy." Her expression tightened. "You're being sensitive again." "Maybe," I said softly, "but maybe I'm just done pretending that kindness and control are the same thing." For a moment, the only sound was the lapping water. Then she muttered, "You've changed." "I hope so," I said. "That was the point." She didn't reply, just turned and walked back toward the house, her silhouette fading into the porch light. David let out a slow breath. "You handled that better than I would have." I smiled faintly. "You always say that." We stayed there until the sky deepened to indigo, the stars bright and scattered. I could have left right then, quietly, and no one would have noticed. But something in me said stay. When we finally walked back toward the yard, most of the family had drifted inside. Only Rick remained by the fire pit, a fresh beer in his hand and that smug grin still glued to his face. "Thought you'd taken off," he said. "Almost did," I answered. He leaned back in his chair. "You know, Mom worries about you. Thinks you've wasted your potential. Does she?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "I mean, you were smart, Marth. Top of your class. You could have been something. I am something," I said. He laughed. "You know what I mean." "I think I do." David stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Rick, maybe you should quit while you're ahead." Rick raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just talking." No harm meant. But there it was again. That same smirk, the one that said, "You'll always be less." Before I could answer, the sound of tires rolling up the gravel cut through the quiet. Everyone turned toward the driveway. 2 trucks pulled in, dark blue and silver, both with the logo of Reed and Company, construction on the side. Rick frowned. "Who's that?" David smiled slightly. "Guess they made it." The doors opened and 2 men stepped out, both wearing clean work shirts and carrying folders. They waved. "Evening, boss," one called out. "We brought the contracts for next week. Didn't mean to interrupt family time, I swear." The color drained from Rick's face. "Boss?" he repeated. David nodded politely. Yeah, they work for us. We're starting a veterans housing project on the North Ridge. Rick blinked. You own a company? Co-own, David corrected. Martha handles planning and community grants. Mom appeared on the porch again, drawn by the noise. What's going on? Rick turned to her. Did you know about this? She shook her head slowly. No. One of the workers handed David a folder. He flipped it open, checked a page, and signed. Sorry about the timing, he said to me. I told them to drop these off Monday. It's fine, I said, my voice even. Rick still hadn't moved. You're telling me this farm thing is actually a business? I looked at him, steady. It's a livelihood, Rick. We employ 16 people now, local vets, single parents, folks trying to get back on their feet. Mom's hand went to her mouth. 16? I nodded. And next month, we're partnering with the city to build an education center on the west side. David's firm is donating the materials. For once, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Rick cleared his throat, searching for something clever to say. Nothing came. David handed him one of the honey jars. You said it was cute earlier, he said. Turns out cute sells. Even Mom laughed softly at that, though her eyes were still wide. Rick looked down, jaw tight. Well, good for you, I guess. I smiled gently. It's good for the community, Rick. Not just for me. He didn't answer. The workers waved goodbye and drove off. As the taillights disappeared into the dark, I turned back toward the house. Everyone else had gathered at the windows. Cousins, aunts, people who hadn't said 2 words to me all night. Their faces pressed to the glass like spectators at a play they didn't know had already ended. Mom stepped closer, her voice quieter now. Why didn't you tell us, Martha? I met her eyes. Because you never asked. For once, she didn't have a reply. Inside, the fire in the pit crackled, sending sparks into the night air. I could feel something shift, not in them, but in me. The space between who I used to be and who I'd become was finally wide enough to breathe in. David brushed a hand against my shoulder. You ready to head home? Almost, I said. We walked toward the truck together. My old pickup looked different now under the porch light. Not small, not shabby, just mine. Behind us, Rick called out, Hey, Martha. I turned. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't mean to, it was just, it's fine, I said. Really? He nodded, eyes darting away. You've done well. Guess I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said, not unkindly. That's the difference. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Mom stood on the steps, her hand resting on the railing. For a moment, she looked smaller somehow, like time had caught up to her. You always did things your own way, she said softly. Maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. I smiled, not gloating, just grateful. Maybe. David opened the passenger door for me. Before I climbed in, I looked back once more. The porch lights glowed warm against the night, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider, not because they finally saw me, but because I didn't need them to anymore. We drove away slow, the gravel crunching under the tires. The night stretched out before us, calm and endless. David reached over, took my hand, and said the simplest, truest thing anyone could have said in that moment. You were never the one who needed proving, Martha. I squeezed his hand. I know. But it feels good to remember he smiled, eyes on the road. Let them laugh next time. You've already won outside the window. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting back a life that finally belonged to me. Steady, unpolished, and enough. We didn't speak much on the drive home. The radio hummed softly, one of those old stations that played songs you forgot you loved. The kind that made you remember who you were before life got noisy. David drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near mine. The windows were cracked open and the air carried the smell of pine and lake water. Penny for your thoughts, he said finally. I smiled faintly. They're worth at least 2 pennies. He grinned. Deal. What's on your mind? Just, How long it took me to stop needing them to clap for me, I said. All those years, I thought success meant proving something, but tonight felt different. I didn't need to win. I just needed peace. He nodded slowly. You found it. Maybe I did. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the good kind, the kind that feels like rest after a long day of pretending. When we reached home, the porch light flicked on automatically, spilling warm light across the wooden steps. Our dog, Charlie, bounded out from the shadows, tail wagging like we'd been gone for months instead of hours. David laughed, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. See? Someone's thrilled to see you, I bent down beside them, my hands brushing over Charlie's fur. He doesn't care how old my truck is, I said. David looked up at me. That's why he's the smart one. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and coffee grounds. The kitchen table still had a jar of honey sitting in the middle, half full, a spoon resting beside it. I poured us both tea, no words needed. We sat across from each other like we always did, quietly, comfortably, like two people who'd learned that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. After a while, I said, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" He took a sip, then met my eyes. Maybe. Maybe not, but that's not your job anymore. I nodded. The truth of that felt lighter than I expected. When I went to bed that night, the moonlight spilled across the room, silver and still. On my nightstand sat the small wooden box where I kept letters, photos, and reminders of who I used to be. I opened it slowly, fingers brushing against a folded piece of paper. A college acceptance letter I once thought defined my worth. I smiled, tucked it back, and closed the lid. I didn't need those old markers anymore. The next morning came soft and golden. The sun slipped through the curtains, landing on the quilt my grandmother made decades ago. The same one Mom used to say was too old-fashioned. I got up, made coffee, and stepped out onto the porch. The world smelled new, even though it was the same world as yesterday. David joined me with his mug. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." My mind's quiet but awake. He nodded. That's usually what peace feels like. We stood side by side, watching a few birds dart between the trees. The hum of the morning felt steady. No drama, no pretending, just being. I thought about my mother's face the night before, the way her voice softened when she said, "You've always done things your own way." For years, that line had sounded like an accusation. Last night, it sounded almost like respect. Maybe she'd never say the words I once needed to hear, but maybe she didn't have to. Sometimes closure isn't a door slamming shut. It's realizing you don't need to knock anymore. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed, a message from Rick. "Thanks for last night. Mom's been quiet today. Said she's proud of you, even if she didn't say it right." I stared at the words for a moment. Not perfect, but enough. I typed back, "Tell her I'm proud of her too," then hit send. David glanced up from his book. "Good news?" "Progress," I said. He smiled. "That counts." By evening, I found myself walking through the garden behind the house. Rows of herbs and flowers brushed my hands as I passed. Lavender, mint, sage, all planted in the same patch of soil we'd once doubted could grow anything. The bees hummed softly around the hives. I lifted the lid of one, careful and slow. Inside, they worked in perfect rhythm. No noise, no ego, just purpose. It struck me then. This was what I'd wanted all along. Not recognition, not revenge, just the quiet assurance that I'd built something real, something alive. I whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Maybe to life, maybe to myself. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I wasn't planning to post anything, but the words came easily. Sometimes peace isn't found in applause. It's found in silence. In the space where you stop chasing approval and start living your truth. If your worth depends on someone else's eyes, you'll spend your life performing. But when you find it inside yourself, you finally get to rest. I hit save as draft. No hashtags, no performance, just truth. the kind you keep for yourself. Later, as the clock neared midnight, a soft knock came at the door. I opened it to find the same workers from last night standing on the porch. "Sorry, Mrs. Reed," one said. "We forgot to drop off the thank you plaque for the Veterans Project." "The team wanted you to have it." He handed me a small wooden frame. Inside, etched in brass, were the words, "For compassion in action, for building homes, not just houses." I blinked, swallowing hard. "Tell them. Thank you." Truly, as they drove off, David wrapped an arm around me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, voice soft, just realizing something. "What's that?" "That the people who matter already see me. I just had to stop standing in the way he smiled. You've always been seen, Martha." Some of them just needed time to adjust their eyes. When I went to bed that night, I didn't think about the reunion or the laughter or even the look on Rick's face. I thought about my hands, the same hands that once shook trying to sign a lease, now strong enough to build something that lasts. I thought about my mother's words, "You've changed." And I smiled, because for the first time I wasn't apologizing for it. The quiet around me felt full, not empty, not lonely, just enough. And before I turned off the light, I whispered a small prayer I hadn't said in years. Let me never forget who I am when the noise fades. Have you ever outgrown the need to prove yourself? If so, you know what freedom feels like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just breathes. And that, my friends, is how peace sounds. When you finally learn to listen. Sometimes peace isn't about walking away from people. It's about walking back home to yourself. Martha didn't win by proving anyone wrong. She won by realizing she never had to. Her story reminds us that worth doesn't come from applause or comparison. It grows quietly inside the life we choose to live. So if you've ever felt unseen, take this as your sign. You don't need to shine louder. Just stand steady in your own light. That's where freedom begins. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, your love, your truth, your place are worth defending.